Good afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. David Molnar joining us today. We're going to talk about his new book, Learning to See: A Photographer's Guide from Zero to Your First Paid Gigs. A little bit of a role reversal today, David. Normally you're the podcaster, you're doing the interviews. We got you in the hot seat today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm a big fan, a big fan of yours. Your work is beautiful.
Thank you.
And
Thank
and
you.
I've been a B&H customer for a long time, a
And
very
we
long
know what
time.
that means. That means that he's well invested in the brand here. So no, it's great to
Yeah,
have you on, man. I mean, your work is beautiful. And even beyond that, what you're doing, you're a business, you're a brand, you are an entity. And that's why we have you on here today, is to really just talk about how you started, the bumps that you got over, and how
yeah,
you got to where we are today, and talking about this new book. So we're going to drop a link to that new book for those of you who want to purchase the book. Definitely support David, check out his work, check out what he has, and really what you do, David, and what you're doing in this book is what we do every day here, or try to do. That's educate people, right? We want
yeah.
more educated photographers out there. So talk to me a little bit about how you got into photography, and what was your passion for it.
Yeah. So, what's interesting is I actually started in the dark room. I was using this stuff called film. You might have to Google that to like find out what that is, I mean, this gray hair is kind of giving it away a little bit, but yeah, I started in the dark room when I was, I think 14 in Mr. Binkley's photography class, photography 101, kind of fell in love with it, but didn't really think as photography as a viable career path. That wasn't on my radar. And I was actually going to pursue being a professional pilot. It's funny because the first line in my book, by the way, this is the book, and
Nice.
so don't judge the book, or don't judge my my dad bags under my eyes, because this book cover was a little bit retouched, so like like I'm a little bit more wrinkly in real life. But the first line in the book actually says, if I can get there, it says, I was never supposed to be a professional photographer. I guess my camera's kind of blown out. But it's amazing, though, how almost dying can change the course of your life forever. So I got in a head-on collision when I was 18 years old. Both cars were going about 60 miles per hour. And it was that moment that my life changed forever, because, and I know this is a podcast, or, a live about photography, but I had a dream, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up. I don't know about you guys, but I just, it was like we had to kind of make our own way. And I love my parents.
Mhm.
They provided an incredible life and a living for us. But my ticket out of this small town, the little island that I grew up on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, was to go to college. And the only path that I saw to do that without getting in a crap ton of debt was to get a scholarship. And I wrestled in high school, not like WWF, but actually competitive wrestling. And I had, worked so hard that I got pretty good in my later years of high school, my junior and senior year. I was undefeated my senior year, and I was expected to win the state championship. And I got in this car accident, and then all of a sudden I had knee surgeries, my legs didn't work, and I watched the guy that I beat win the state championship. And I waved goodbye to all my college potential scholarships. I was talking to UNC Chapel Hill and Appalachian State and a bunch of other colleges, universities that were going to be like, this is my ticket out of the small town, my way to kind of pursue this path of aviation. And it was like, in my sorrow, in my grief, that I kind of found a newfound joy for photography, a renewed passion for it. And a lot of people can probably relate to this, but photography, even though I had been doing it for a few years with film, actually, this is my original camera, this old Nikon film camera
Oh,
right here. My
nice.
dad gave me this camera, and this is like what started it all. But, I wasn't taking photography seriously until after that car accident. And I had a lot of time to sit around, a lot of time to look at my surfing magazines, and a lot of times to like just kind of, think about photography. And I started considering a new path, of being a professional photographer. But I didn't know what that looked like. And the path seemed confusing to me. And there wasn't really a straightforward step-by-step process. I don't know about you, Derek, but there's not really a bar exam for photography, right? You're like, at what point?
Get it where you fit in.
At what point are you pro? At what point are you good? Who's giving you that stamp of approval? Is it from peers? Is it when you get paid for the first time? Like, when are you a photographer? When can you call yourself a photographer? How do you know if you can see like a photographer? Like, there's all these unknowns. And I remember wrestling through that of like, okay, if I want to pursue photography, then how do I do it? And I don't know about you, but when I do something, I'm just like, I'm all in. I'm not really a halfway type person. I'm just like, I'm all in. I bought a record player a couple like months ago, and now I already have like 30 or 40 records, and I keep on like buying new ones because I'm like, I'm all in.
You're one of those 10,000 hours types. Like you take something, you're like, I'm either going to be the best at it or the best I can be, or I'm not trying it. I mean, that's kind of how I am with photography, but it's interesting that, you say you were kind of introduced to it at a time when a lot of people are. We took a photo class or just something like an elective in high school, and you didn't really think you were going to take it seriously. And then next thing you know, it's becoming your career path. So you were officially, was it off the table to be a pilot at that point from the accident on, or?
Well, I mean, I could have still pursued it, but I just didn't want to get in so much debt going into school. And I decided to take a year off and kind of regroup. My legs didn't work. I needed lots of time for PT. Thankfully, I'm back to 90-something% now, and I get to surf and all that stuff. But like, it was dark. It was a dark time in my life because everything I had worked for was taken away from me, and I had to kind of find a new vision for my life. So I took a year off and I went to a nonprofit organization where I was volunteering, and they put on like youth events, like for, Christian youth events and all these different things. And they would have concerts and all this stuff. And I got to start, taking photos for fun at their concerts and started kind of developing a proficiency for it. But but I didn't really consider myself a real photographer. I was a kid borrowing a camera from a nonprofit organization to like learn further, because they wouldn't pay for me to develop film on this old camera. Right. It was like digital cameras were just coming out. And I remember calling B&H. I mean, seriously, like on behalf of the organization. And this is almost 20 years ago, maybe 19 years ago. Yeah. I mean, that's how long I've been. I didn't even spend my money at first. I was spending the nonprofit's money at first to buy a Canon, 10D. Is that right? 10D?
Wow. 10D?
Like a 5 megapixel camera or something like that. Is that right? A 10D?
I think sounds, that would be the first iteration of, that's like a step up from the Rebel.
Yeah. But it was like the first, like, that I remember, like, professional body camera. I don't know. Anyways, and it totally sucked, but it was, I mean, compared to the incredible,
where we're at now,
$1,000 cameras now, it's like mind blowing. But I wanted to photograph my favorite band. My favorite band was this band called Switchfoot. They're still around, and they had this song that was on the radio. This is 2004. Okay. They had this song on the radio that was like, "We were meant to live for so much more." I can't sing. My podcast co-host Rich Coleman always makes fun of me. He's like, "Have you always been tone deaf?" I'm like, "Shut up, you jerk face." But anyways, I love, like, that album was like another piece of therapy for me to come out of this like depression of like my former life and all my dreams, like, ending abruptly. Not my life, but my dreams getting crushed, in that car accident. And I just like set this goal. I'm like, I want to photograph my favorite band. I want to go photograph them, and I want to give them the photos, and I had been practicing shooting these other concerts that were less consequential, but I was getting pretty good at shooting manual mode. I knew how to shoot manual, exposure mode, like the back of my hand. And I could take some pictures and compose a story. I was getting decently proficient, but I didn't consider myself a photographer. I didn't consider myself a professional photographer for sure. And I certainly wasn't confident. But I remember thinking, like I said, like, I'm this guy that goes all in. So like, shoot, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to photograph my favorite band. And I was asking people, I was like, does anyone have contact with this band Switchfoot? Like, I want to photograph them. And everyone's like, no. And then one of my friends said, you know what, I don't know Switchfoot. Because the organization booked bands and speakers. So that's why I was hoping maybe they'd have a contact for context. She's like, I don't know Switchfoot, but my boss, Tammy, I think does know them, or has kept in contact with some of the band members from a previous, business engagement or something. And I'm like, Tammy's that like beautiful girl, like that hot girl that's like your boss. I was like, I don't want to talk to her, and I don't want to be embarrassed if she says no to me. I don't want to be embarrassed if, like they say no to her. Like, I'm like, in life, you only have so much social equity, so many times, so many like asks, you know what I mean?
Never thought of it
like,
like that.
Yeah, you're like,
You gotta save them up.
Yeah, you got to save them up, and that's true. Like, yeah. So anyways, but, so my friend Lacey told her friend Tammy, the beautiful older, woman, it's not old, but older than me. I'm a 20 or 19-year-old kid at the time. Okay. And this girl's like 4 or 5 years older than me. And I just remember thinking like, that girl's gorgeous. And I was stuttering last time I had been introduced to her, and so she contacts the band and they agree to let me in. And I'm just like, holy, yeah. So I like borrow my sister's car. It almost breaks down driving the 5 hours across Texas to get to San Antonio where the concert was. And I'm like praying, I'm like, please God, like let this car like make it there. So we get there and I go to the will call, like the front ticket desk person. And I'm like, I'm so nervous. I've told all my friends, I called my mom, I've made it. I'm going to photograph my favorite band tonight. And I get there and she's like, nope, we can't find your name on the list. And I'm like, and honestly, I'm like melting at this point and like, feel like I'm going to have a mental breakdown because there's just a lot of emotional buildup. I'm a 19-year-old immature kid. Okay. But I have all this anxiety going into it. Like, what if I screw up? What if I embarrass people? All these things. And then I'm like, my name's on the list. And I'm like, I knew it. They saw my crappy website. They realized I'm not a real photographer. They must know that I'm borrowing this camera from the nonprofit to photograph this concert. Like, I'm a failure. I'm a fake. I'm a fraud. And they know it. That's what I was feeling in that moment. And so I called my friend Lacey. I'm like, and I'm like, one last shot. I'm like, can you give me Tammy's number? She gave me Tammy's number. I call Tammy, the beautiful older girl. And I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry to bug you. Like, my name's not on the list. And she's like, okay. She's like, don't freak out. Cause I'm like, like worked up. And she's like, sometimes your name is not on the will call at the front ticket booth, but instead you have to go to the back door and tell them, like your name. And I want you to stay on the phone with me and act like important, like you're supposed to be there. She's like, shoulders back. I'm like, okay. I'm like, is this Jordan Peterson? Like, what's going on here? Anyways, and she's like, act confident, like you're supposed to be there. And there's a lesson there for all of you photographers that feel like a fraud right there. Okay. Shoulders back, act confident, act like you're supposed to be there.
Let me act like
right?
I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
There we go.
And,
All right.
and yeah, there you go. Shoulders back, because I was slouched so much working on the computer. And I'm like, and she's like, and go tell them at the back door, you are David Molnar, the photographer. And I'm like, but I'm not, I'm not a photographer. I'm just like going to take some pictures tonight. Like I'm not really a photographer, and this isn't even my real camera. Like I got to convince the nonprofit to buy this camera from B&H for me, like it's all this stuff. But I'm feeling really anxious, and I do not want to have any more failure. I don't feel like I can take it if they like tell me again that my name's not on the list, because I'm already feeling so insecure. So I'm walking to the back door. It feels like it takes forever around the whole venue. And I see this 300-pound, like, UFC fighter security guard that I'm like kind of nervous to talk to. And I walk up and I muster everything inside of me to confidently say, I'm David Molnar, the photographer. And it was like, and I feel like a fraud saying that out loud. I don't know if I'd ever said that before. And the guy looks at his list. I like black out. I don't remember what happened, but like, I don't know if it was this like false bravado that got me in. I don't know if it was because I was talking on my flip Nokia phone or whatever it was at the time. Or if my name was actually on the list. But he opened the door and ushered me right up to the dressing room of my favorite band in the entire world. And they, I don't know if they knew I was supposed to be there or not, but they're like, hey, I'm John. I'm John. Like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm just going to take some pictures for you guys. Like, cool. And it was like this mind-blowing euphoric experience for a 19-year-old kid. I go and I pour my freaking heart into shooting that concert. All right. And what happened was amazing. I'd never been paid for my work before. I'm this kid with a camera, and they ended up loving the photos, and they ended up paying me $200 to put a photo that I took of them jamming out in the concert on their world tour t-shirt for that album, Beautiful Letdown. And then they ended up paying another $200. And I didn't like, I'm like, you guys can have the photos. Like, no, we want to pay you. I'm like, okay, and they gave me another $200 to put the photo on the, like an inside sleeve of their following album that came out like 6 months later or something like that. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like my dreams come true. My favorite band in the world likes my photos. And they like, they paid me money, the first people ever of all time to pay me money for photography. And I just felt like, holy crap. But what was interesting, Derek, is that I wasn't a photographer when I learned to shoot in manual mode. I wasn't like, I didn't become a real photographer. Like when they said they liked my photos, when they validated me, when they said, oh, we like your photos. I wasn't a photographer when they paid me money. The moment that I became a photographer was the moment I drew a line in the sand and I said, I am David Molnar, the photographer. Because if I didn't put myself out there and act confidently and proclaim it to the world, when I was ready, I may have doubted, but I was actually ready. I had worked my butt off to get to this point. It wasn't like a lucky moment. Mm-hmm. I had actually worked really hard. I just didn't believe that I deserved it yet until I started proclaiming it. And it was amazing, the opportunities that once you proclaim that, once you put yourself out there, and then you do something that amazes yourself. And what I mean by that is you do something you don't believe you can do. And when you accomplish that something, not fumbling through it, but you work your butt off to accomplish that something. And then it has some sort of moderate success or big success that gives you a little notch on your belt of confidence and helps you feel like, wow, I can achieve things that I didn't previously know how to do. And I just think that's an important distinction. The moment that you actually proclaim to yourself, like, I am a photographer, and the world, and you proclaim that to the world. I don't mean like a megaphone, but I'm saying portraying that confidence when you're at a party and people ask what you do, like, well, I sell insurance on the weekend, blah, 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 like, no, it's like, no, if you want to be a photographer, you need to tell them I'm a photographer, or I am a wedding photographer, or I am a portrait photographer, landscape, real estate, whatever it is that is your niche. And when you do that, when you proclaim that, that's the moment that you are a photographer. Now, have you arrived? No. You might have a lot of work to do, but it's taking that step of faith, and doing something that scares you, because it scared the crap out of me.
Totally. I mean, what is it? What holds us back from taking that leap into saying I'm a photographer? Is it, I know one of the common things, and this is always the thing with me, is, okay, you doubt that you're going to be able to, what if they hate my pictures? Then you feel bad asking for money. Or where are people getting caught up that you see in your experience? What is the real hang up for most people?
I think they don't value themselves. They don't see themselves like a photographer. And I think once you see yourself like a photographer, as photographers, like in this book, Learning to See, like we teach 5 steps to becoming a professional photographer. The 5th step being optional, because some people don't want to shoot for money. They want to shoot for the passion or the therapy or the fun of photography. But that first step is universal. It's learning to see like a photographer. And that's twofold. Like step number 1 is to learn to see yourself like a photographer. And I was having trouble in that story, learning to see myself like a photographer. But I had a coach, this beautiful girl, Tammy, like telling me like, hey, you can do this. And I'm like, I don't even know why you're believing in me, but like, okay. And she's like, and I want you to tell them like proclaim this. And I think, I think people get hung up because there is no bar exam for photography, and there's no one that's validating them. They're looking for validation. And I understand that. And validation is good. Okay. I've had shoots years after I was a quote successful professional photographer that failed, that I screwed up. Okay. And the band didn't like the album cover pictures, or the model thought she looked too whatever, unflattering in the photos. And I felt bad about it. But you know what I did? I would brush myself off and try harder next time. I got to also mention something really quick. That beautiful girl, Tammy, that I was afraid to talk to. I ended up marrying her.
Oh, no way. Oh,
yeah.
Come
yeah.
on.
Yeah. I married her. And then, like, I was going to say, there's like this, because I write about that story in the book. And like, so here, and like at the end, like there's like this moment. Here's like, I don't know if you can see this, but it's like Tammy and us and our gazillion kids. Yeah, no, it's
so
just
that confidence helped with your wife as well. Because if you didn't have that confidence, that's it. There's no family as you know it right now.
That's true. I mean, thank God for Switchfoot, because I wouldn't have 4 beautiful little kids, otherwise. So, but yeah, people get hung up on building that confidence of, like if they don't take any leaps of faith, warranted leaps of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not saying you should go you should go shoot a wedding on your iPhone before, before you know how to like take professional pictures. Like, no, you put the time and the practice in, you get test models out there, you build that confidence and that repertoire and those instincts first, and you prepare before that opportunity, comes, like success is where like luck and preparedness like meet, or that's where opportunity meets. I'm probably botching that quote, but like you have to work your butt off. This is not an easy thing to become a photographer overnight, No,
I mean, you're a professional problem solver is what you are. How many shoots have you showed up on that anything doesn't go right, and you have to call an audible on the fly, and you have to, while still smiling, and you could have, I mean, look, you've worked on huge campaigns, you're working for major brands, and you can't go on a brand shoot for Pepsi Cola, say, and something goes wrong. You're like, sorry, I didn't script for this. You got to figure it out, and you have to keep a smile on your face and remain confident in the face of a creative director who probably knows that something's off.
Yeah. Like,
sure you got
how
plenty
many
of
shoots? How many shoots? Like every single shoot I've ever been on in my entire life, which is at least 3 or 4 shoots. I'm kidding. I mean, I don't know how many thousands of shoots that I've done. There's always like a wrench in the situation. Always. There's always something that comes up that you have to pivot on. My podcast co-host, Rich Coleman, who's a brilliant photography mentor as well, he always says like, shoot, pivot, and improve. And like, so when you get a wrench thrown at you, you shoot it, and like if you're shooting a person, don't ever say, oh, that looks horrible. Like, be like, okay, like I'm going to pivot over here. Like you always want to encourage, if you have a human being in front of you. Now, if it's food, you can be like, you suck. You don't look pretty, but if it's a human, you need to constantly pivot and be, and be flexible in this situation. So yeah, Derek, like every single shoot that I've ever done, there's been a wrench, thrown at me. And then there's times where it's like you plan for a really cool setup that is like your hero shot, like this is the thing for that day, and it doesn't work, and then you just gotta, keep on tweaking. There's an interesting thing, whether it's in photography or life or a specific photo shoot, or even just the trajectory of your career. If a pilot is flying from, LaGuardia in New York to LA, okay, the runway is not necessarily pointing towards LA. All right. I don't know which directions they're pointing. I forget. But like the pilot has to take off, get momentum, get air, get elevation, and then adjust course, okay, to direct their plane towards LA, if that's where they're going, okay? Mm-hmm. Photography, whether it's a photo shoot or whether it's, in terms of your entire career, sometimes you have to start getting momentum and you have to take off and get lift and realize like, oh, I actually don't want to be a headshot photographer. I'm going to change course and I'm going to pursue real estate photography or wedding photography or whatever. And what's interesting is that momentum, that speed, that airspeed, that lift, whatever that you've started to get as a headshot photographer can translate into, senior portraits or, whatever it is, right? In the beginning, my career, I did start like, so I shot that Switchfoot stuff when I was 19 years old. And unfortunately, $400 was not enough to retire on. Like at the time, I felt like it was $1 million, but it really was like, it was just an encouraging moment in my life, in my career, that like, maybe I could do this for a profession. But then I pivoted towards, kind of reluctantly, towards shooting weddings. And my wife and I ended up being a husband and wife wedding photography team. And we got blessed. We got to shoot weddings all over the country, whether it's New York or Miami or LA or Arkansas or all sorts of other places. We got to shoot all over the country. We got to shoot in Switzerland a few times, in the Alps. We got to shoot in the islands of Greece, like mesmerizing, mind-blowing places. But the truth is that it wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't what was in my heart to do. But the experience and the momentum that I got from shooting those weddings, from working with so many people, and the finances, like the financial stability of shooting something, consistent and constant, like weddings, of having those, deposits come in 6 months to a year in advance and knowing we're going to get paid X amount of dollars more in June of next year. That sort of stability provided an environment for me to advance in my photography skills, and just my, wisdom and experience, so that when the time came, I got to, pivot my career and start shooting commercial photography and album covers that millions of people have seen. And that was my real dream. But the truth is like, when I started shooting weddings at 21 years old, like no record label wanted to hire a kid that doesn't have any experience, and doesn't even know lighting to shoot the album covers. They want to see someone that's vetted and proven. And while I was shooting those weddings, the experience that I gained when I was taking off in LaGuardia, all right, like the experience and the wisdom, the finances, the gear, the relationships that I made allowed me to pivot towards my actual dream, and then pursue it with everything I've got. So yeah, life doesn't always go the way that you plan, but you gotta start.
I'm glad you went that direction, because it's a question that comes up all the time, and I'm sure you hear it a ton. People are starting out and they kind of dip their hand in a little bit of everything, right? It's and it shows. You'll go on someone who's just starting out in their website, and it's like they have a wedding folder, then they have like a street photography folder, and then like headshots, and it's like food, and it's like all over the place. And I actually just got this question the other day of like, when do you know when it's time to go one direction? Is there ever a case where you would say, no, you don't have to? But for someone who's trying to be taken seriously as a professional, because I remember hearing one of my first mentors told me, in this, it's stuck in my head ever since then. He said, I would hire this person, but I don't know which person's going to show up. Is the food photographer going to show up, or is the commercial photographer going to show up? Because I sure as heck don't want to hire the commercial photographer and then I'm getting the food photographer. Like I want that person to show that they can handle everything I'm throwing at them. And that's always stuck with me. And ever since that day, because back then I was one of those people. Like, I'm going to do it all. Why can't I be good at everything?
You don't want to turn down gigs, so you want to say,
of course, you never want to say no.
That. Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. It's a question I ask in, I think it's chapter 9 of my book, which is like developing into the photographer that you want to be. If you're having heart surgery to save your life, right? Like, let's say, God forbid, something happens and you need to have, open heart surgery. Do you want that surgeon to walk in and be like, yeah, I'm a part-time plumber and I'm, dabble in surgery as well. Like no, like
down the hall. They're down the hall.
You do not want the heart surgeon that's a part-time plumber. No offense to plumbers. That's not what I'm saying. what I'm saying is you want the freaking best in the world to operate on you and your open heart surgery. All right. The clients that have paid me the most money, not that it's all about money, okay, but whether it's a wedding photographer, or a wedding gig, like it's a bride or a mother or bride paying you, like they don't want to see your rock concerts, or your street photography pictures, even though I love street photography, they don't want to see those pictures. Like when they're trying to hire you and pay you a gazillion dollars, or let's say if they have a big budget, they're looking for the world's best wedding photographer. All right. And your portfolio better represent that. Because if you're saying I also shoot, tattooed whales in Antarctica, I can't pronounce that word, and you have these obscure things like, I don't know, you're a hot air balloon enthusiast or something, then, you're going to look like that surgeon that's a part-time plumber. All right. And they're not going to take you seriously. All right. There was a moment, and I kind of had to do this. Like when I was a wedding photographer, like I had to swallow my pride because what I wanted to do was shoot album covers. Like that's what I wanted to do. And I realized that that was not the path for me at that point. I needed to take off first. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was a wedding photographer, I adjusted my portfolio to where it was David Molnar Weddings. And then we, rebranded to David and Tammy because my wife and I were wedding photographers together. And that was our portfolio. It didn't show the rock and roll photography that I love shooting. It didn't show any of the indie bands that I had shot for free while I was trying to build my photography album cover portfolio. Like it didn't show that stuff. It just showed weddings, and it showed darn good pictures of weddings. Don't show only show what you want to sell,
You can still do it. Just don't put it out there. Don't muddy the waters and advertise it.
Yeah. I'm not saying you can't do it for fun. And, like landscape photography is a great illustration. Like I love landscape photography probably the most out of all photography. Don't tell any of my album cover clients, right? Like I love it the most, but it's the thing that's paid me the least over the years, right? So there's an author named Louis Schiff who wrote in his book, Business Brilliant, which was a brilliant business book. And he talked about this idea of, he would take all these things that Americans or, middle-class Americans would say, and he'd flip them over on their head and be like, that's wrong. And here's the truth, and it was interesting. It was really interesting because there was like 10 or 12 truths. I forget how many in the book, but one of the things that we hear all the time, like do what you love, and the money will follow, and the money will always follow. And it's like, not necessarily true. I'm sorry. I don't mean to crush your dreams. But what he said is, he's like, that's not really true. He's like, but he's like, what you should do is do what you love, but always, always follow the money. And I don't mean to make it all about money. I shoot because I love it. If I wanted to make money, I would have gone and been a lawyer or investment banker or something. I shoot photography because I have to, because it's who I am in my soul.
It's your passion.
But it's my passion, but I also have a wife and 4 kids that I need to support. So I have to make money as the dad, in my family. Right. So anyways, I say that because what Louis Schiff said in that book, he's like, that quote of like, do what you love and the money will always follow. He's like, false. He's like, do what you love, but always, always, always follow the money. And then he explains what that means. And he gave some beautiful illustrations in the book. But he's like, because the things that you want to do may not be marketable. You have to shoot something that people are willing to pay money from. Rich Coleman, my podcast co-host, who I referenced earlier, he was in college. He didn't finish college. He quit after this illustration. But he was talking to his college professor, his photography class, and he showed him this beautiful landscape picture of the mountains. And his college professor said this, and I respect it so much. He's like, hey, that is a beautiful photo. He's like, do you want to know how you could make a lot of money with a photo like that? And he's like, how? He's like, put a bride in front of that mountain. And Rich got it. He was like, oh man, because the truth is that mountains don't pay you, people pay you. And there has to be a desire to pay money for what the service or the art that you're providing. And what I'm not saying is that no one pays for landscape photography. Like they do, but it's a harder path, and you have to really find your niche and build like a high-end clientele to do it. So like for instance, if you love landscape photography and you don't like photographing people, like a great opportunity for you to follow the money, to do what you love, which is photography, and not do something that you hate, which is, let's say if it's photographing people, if you're like not a people person, like I get that, like that's fine. You could take all of your skills for photographing landscapes and you could photograph real estate photography, because you can make a crap ton of money shooting real estate stuff. And then you're still getting to take beautiful artistic landscape images. There's just a house in that picture. And if you want to take beautiful landscape photos with only a mountain stream, like do that, but don't like make your family starve because that's the only thing that you're willing to do.
Interesting perspective. You actually read the mind of one of our viewers, Josie, who's showing us on Vimeo. Literally, as the question was coming in, you were talking about finding your niche. Josie's struggling to find her niche. How do you narrow down and find your niche?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it, really, you're the only person that can answer that. However, there's some questions you can ask yourself that can kind of get you close. Okay. Because at the end of the day, you have to do what I did. You have to do what a lot of photographers do, is you have to start. You have to, like that illustration we were talking about, where you have to take off first and find, kind of find yourself, find your voice and find what you like, and then pivot and kind of start heading in that direction. And it's okay. Like you don't have to stay in the same. If you start shooting dog portraits in the studio, I know some people that make a lot of money doing that. Then, but then you find like, hey, I actually want to pivot and shoot, I don't know, food photography instead. Like there's a great market for that as well. But so, some of the easy questions, or some of the straightforward questions you can ask yourself very simply to find your niche to start out is, do I want to shoot a graph? That's a word I just made up. Shoot a graph. Do I want to shoot a graph? Do I want to shoot? Yeah, I know. Someone buy that domain in real quick. Do I want to shoot people, or do I want to shoot things? And really, it's like, do I want to shoot insecure people? Because everyone's insecure. Sorry, maybe you're not, Derek, but like we all have insecurities, right?
Totally am.
Yeah, we all have insecurities. Like when I was getting photographed for my book cover, I mean, honestly, like Rich Coleman, who photographed this book cover, I was like really nervous. I was like, this is going to be, hopefully a lot of people see this. So I don't want to, like, I've got a crooked tooth. Should I smile or should I not smile? Like there's all these insecurities that we have, anyway, so are you willing to kind of push through that stuff with people? Cause it can be a lot to work through, when you're, anytime we're photographing people. Some of the most famous people that, and I'm not going to name any of them, but some of the most famous people that I've photographed were the most insecure. It's crazy. So do you want to photograph people, or do you want to photograph things? If you want to photograph people, and you want to make money, then you can look at the really viable career paths. Headshot photographer, huge path. Wedding photographer, huge path, very viable. There's huge market for that. Mm-hmm. And then there's all sorts of niches within wedding photography, but that's the thing. You got to take off first and then pivot towards your niche of, shooting, fine art elopements or whatever it is. Portraits, other really, marketable niches could be like family portraiture or senior portraits. And there's a bunch of other ones, right? But the point is like those markets, like wedding photography, headshot, senior portraits, family portraits, those are very well-established markets that we all know that people are willing to pay money in, and you could make a full-time living in. All right. If you want to shoot things, like I mentioned, landscape photography, like it's a hard one to make a living in. I shoot it for fun because I love landscapes. After this book launches, we're going to go to Iceland and just take beautiful pictures. Just for fun.
That's awesome.
It's going to be awesome. But I'm not trying to make a living shooting landscapes. I do have a friend, Jonah Allen, who has a studio right down the street from me. He photographs mind-blowingly beautiful seascapes, and he's making multiple six figures income with his landscapes, his seascapes. He's found a niche that's incredible, but landscape is hard. So if you want to shoot things, consider food photography. No, food doesn't talk back to you. And what's cool is you can take time to tweak until you get that perfect shot. It's really cool. Real estate photography, you can tweak until you get the perfect shot, and you can edit and add fake skies in and raise the shadows a bunch and do all sorts of things. And other types of product photography and There's all sorts of other things that you can do with still life photography as well. All right. So those are some of the biggest things that you can just kind of like identify, like the genres of people or not people, and then start honing it in. And even if you're shooting weddings, like I mentioned, there's a ton of genres of weddings, outdoors, indoors, whether it's like an Indian wedding or whether it's a Greek wedding or like whatever it is, that's the thing you got to take off, find out what you like, find your voice, and then start pivoting towards your destination. Because I can't answer that for you. Only you can do it. And it comes through experience.
Now, a lot of things get tricky when you introduce money. I think that's where a lot of people hit that point where it's like, okay, passion versus side income versus, okay, we're going all out. We're throwing all caution to the wind, and we're going to try to do this thing for real for a full-time income. What is the biggest thing that people get hung up on in regards to charging or the money aspect of professional photography?
I think a lot of people feel like they're not worthy of being paid because of the stuff we were talking about earlier.
So we just project our insecurities onto potential paying clients.
And there's a lot of, what's interesting is how many of you guys know a photographer that's not that great, but talks a big game and somehow gets paid a lot of money.
It seems like they outnumber the talented photographers. I think the talented photographers are always the ones that have imposter syndrome. And it's the people who are like, they have the business sense. I mean, the most successful photographers I see are the great business people. It's not the most talented photographers. It's the talented business.
It's perception, and I think, I don't mean this to sound pretentious. I think I have a little bit of both of that. So I might be a little bit of an anomaly there, because I've worked my butt off on trying to, develop my craft.
You're a rare breed in that sense of the people who possess the ability and the business acumen.
But I thought now I teach photography for a living, right? Like I do album cover shoots and stuff occasionally when a big shoot comes along, but I kind of pour my heart into, like writing books and helping other photographers pursue their dreams now. But the honest truth is I wouldn't touch teaching for the first decade plus of my photography career, because I never, ever wanted to be deemed as those that can't do teach. Like I couldn't I like that whole imposter syndrome is like the antithesis of like, of being a fraud or being I've seen photographers out there that like have one little success, it's like the people that get married and then like on their honeymoon, they start writing their book on how to have a great marriage. I'm like,
yeah, totally.
you have no idea, and those photographers who have one good year and then they're like teaching everyone. I'm like, listen, like, maybe you have some tips, but like, give me a seasoned veteran who like actually knows, So yeah, I don't know. I went on a rabbit trail there.
No, I mean, it makes sense. And it is one of those things because you don't run into it often where you have the people. It's like you have the educators. You have educators who are, and this is regardless of money. You have people who I always break down into three things. You have an artist, educator, lecturer. You have people that take great photos and they can't talk about them and they can't educate others. You have some people who are, phenomenal lecturers, but their pictures are all right, or phenomenal teachers. And then there's a mix of the three. And I guess it all depends. It's like anything else. It's all relative. What do you want to do with it? What is your end goal? And I think that's probably an overarching theme to nailing photography is your version of success making a lot of money and doing commercial shoots or doing big, $10, $20, $30,000 weddings? Or is your version of success in photography being in a gallery or being respected by your peers or just taking images that you feel good about and you're content with people telling you take nice images?
Yeah. Are you asking me what my version of success is, or you're
I'm just kind of I'm kind of throwing it out there, but for you, I mean, was your version of success always, was it, where did you lie? Did you change your definition of success as you got further on the path?
I think that's a great question. And I think your answer, your unique answer to all the listeners, to what success is where you are right now. It's determined by where you are. And that goalpost can move over time. I know mine has moved. All right. My early version of success before I had anything was I want to photograph my favorite band and give them the pictures and hopefully they'll post it on their website, And then and then like, it was incredible. They used the photos in other places beyond just a post on social media or something. It was MySpace back then, I think. So,
Oh, wow.
and it was crazy. Yeah. It's like, I'm really old. But then my success was, I need to pay my freaking bills. I am drowning in debt. I have to somehow pay the credit card bill this month. Okay. And that was my marker. Like, I have to pay rent. I've got to buy, Tostinos, the $1 pizzas from Walmart. Like, and I've got to pay the credit card bill, because like, I love my parents, but it didn't come from a bunch of money. Like, daddy didn't, like, pay for
You
everything.
actually had
Right.
bills you had to cover.
Yeah. Like, gosh, I everything I have has been bootstrapped, Um, and, and then my success came from like, can I book a $500 wedding? And then it was like, can I book $1,000 wedding? Can we make $40,000 a year? And then it was, can we make $100,000 a year? And can we book 30 weddings that are $3,000 a piece and sell a few albums too? And when we achieve these milestones, they would, build these like, like I said, notch in the belt of your confidence. So where is success? Like, what defines success? It's really like, what is the goalpost that's in front of you? And I also want to say this, because there can be time where I move past a goal too quickly. You need to take time to stop and celebrate when you achieve something, however large or small that nominal success is. Hey, this is the first time that I posted a photo and I got 10 likes on Instagram. Like, that's awesome. Take a moment and be like, I'm putting myself out there. I'm calling myself a photographer. And this is the picture of the hummingbird and the flower. And like, this is the first time I got, 50 likes. Like, that's a big deal. You need to celebrate it. The first time you get a paid gig, like, take it in, take a picture, like a memory picture. I don't know what I'm trying to say. A mental picture of this moment and the way it feels, and celebrate that success. And, I love this quote, and I forget who said it, but comparison is the thief of joy. So if you compare yourself, to Derek's photos with a ton of thousands and thousands of followers, and you look at how many likes he gets on his photos, and you're like, oh man, I only got 12 likes on my photo. Like, comparison is the thief of joy. The only person you should be comparing yourself to is yesterday. How have I improved of your previous self? All right. So your definition of success can vary over the years, but take time to celebrate where you're at and don't compare yourself to others. It's unhealthy. It's unproductive.
Mm-hmm. How do you see, what role does social media play for you? I mean, I know that that's a loaded topic here in social media. I think there's a lot of great things and there's some things that aren't so great and you have to kind of filter out. For you, look, you're accomplished in real life, offline, right? You have the online stuff down as well. Where do you suggest people? I mean, do you suggest that people still use social media as an avenue if they're trying to get started out, or what direction should people put? If you were going to tell somebody, put a majority of your marbles in one basket, where does social media lie in that scenario?
I do think it's really important, but it also depends on your market. Is your market peers that that are at the coffee shop that you frequent? Is it your local church? Is it I don't know, your Rotary group? And like, what is your market? Is your market to sell online, to sell prints online, and people, your market can be anywhere in the world. Like, what is your market, right? But I do think that, going back to what we were talking about earlier, of like, crossing that line in the sand and projecting that you are a photographer, I think it's important that your social media portrays that. And it's interesting, as I'm going through a little bit of a transition myself right now, because the last few years, I have to be honest, I've kind of ignored social media because I had my head down, nose to the grind, writing this book. So I kind of ignored, like, my Instagram account. Like, it has, you know, a bunch of followers on it, or compared to some people, I have none, but it has a lot of followers on it. And it's like, it has pictures of me and my kids like going surfing or paddleboarding, because that's like the phase of life. I'm like a dad, and I just finally were out of diapers after 9 freaking years, you know? And it's like it's us riding our
Best
bikes,
feeling
and
in the
it
world.
was just like my life stuff on there. And it was interesting because I tell people, like, because I have a company called the Photo Mentorship, and it's kind of like Netflix, but for photographers. And a lot of people are like, oh, really? You have and I'm like, yeah, I have 50 courses, 50 online courses that photographers can go from zero all the way to professional photographer, and, you know, follow a real estate photography path, or a wedding photography path, or portrait photographer, landscape photographer, whatever it is. And people are like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah, I haven't done a good job of like representing that online. But I think that's doing a disservice to my would-be customers, my would-be you know, clients, to not really portray what I actually and accurately do. And if you are not accurately portraying what you do and who you are as the photographer that you are and that you want to be, then you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're doing your would-be customers or clients a disservice. Because how do they know? How do they know that you are a wedding photographer? How do they know that you are a food photographer or real estate photographer, whatever it is? They don't know, you know, if you're not accurately, you know, projecting it. And sometimes we'll get like, well, this photo didn't get a ton of likes. Well, but did it get a like from the person that ends up hiring you? Like, that's actually the, you know, these vanity things of like, I got likes or I got shares, like, they're not important. Really, at the end of the day, is like, it's real people. What is it like in you know, in the real world? Is social media important? 100%. You've got to portray, you know, what's accurate, you know, not putting some false persona, but who you are as a, you know, as a business, if that's what you want to do, or as an artist, if that's what you want to do. Maybe you're just sharing your work to inspire others for your own joy, for your own therapy. And I applaud that. At least half of the members of the Photo Mentorship um, just want to shoot for themselves. And I love that. That's awesome. That was me. I just wanted to shoot for myself. But then I kind of stumbled on professional photography, and I'm so glad I did.
It gave you that purpose, and you were still able. I mean, again, that's another one of those things where some people take their passion and they try to turn it into a paycheck, and it doesn't work out so well. But it sounds like you have managed to take something that you're passionate about, turn it into a very nice paycheck, and still keep evolving. I mean, I'm getting the sense that you continue to evolve as a photographer, as an educator, as an inspiration to people, and that's awesome, man. I think one of the greatest things about sitting down with you here is, you know, other than just dropping gems, you drop gems for the last hour, David. So I purposely, I'm like, I didn't want to dive too deep into the book, because I want people to go out and buy this book. I want people to really dig into it for themselves. But I still wanted to provide, you know, a look and a glimpse inside to what people will be getting with it. But I think every time you open your mouth, it's inspirational. I mean, it's experience. It's somebody who's been there in the trenches, and somebody who's gotten out. And probably the greatest, you know, thing about your approach is that it's not do this, do this, do this. It's, well, this might work for you, but it might not. And I think some people take an approach to teaching. It's like, you're going to do what I did, and that's your only way to success. And your approach is really, look, we all come from different backgrounds. We all want different things. You have to dabble here, you have to dabble there. I can kind of help guide you. I can provide you options. I can help provide you some forethought. But ultimately, you got to put your boots on the ground. You got to get your hands dirty, and it may not work. And if it doesn't work, you got to keep going. Fair to say? Fair to say that? That's
100% fair to say. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, because the reality is like, the exact things that I did aren't going to work for you, because you don't know the same people that I knew growing up. Right. Or, you know, you may want to shoot, you know, food photography, and I wanted to shoot, I didn't want to shoot weddings, but I ended up falling in love with shooting weddings, and then it led to something else. Right. But that's why in the book, in the book, you know, which I'm so proud of, man. It's like hardback copy, full color.
awesome.
I'm just like, I'm stoked. But there's 5 parts that we go through in the book, and it's really a guide to becoming a photographer. That's really what it is. Okay, and it's like it is understanding that, hey, you know, the path to become a wedding photographer, then album cover photographer, may have been different for me than it would be for you or for one of our listeners. But there is, big picture steps that all photographers need to go through, regardless of whether or not they want to end up professional full-time, part-time, or even just, for the love of photography. And we all need to go through learning to see like a photographer, which is step 1 in the book, learning to shoot like a pro, which is shooting in manual exposure mode and taking the images that you see in your head. I don't care what type of photography you want to create. You have to learn how to actually control, this freaking thing and master this camera and teach it to do what you want it to do. Right. And then step 3 is to edit to recreate the emotion that you felt in the moment. Because how many of you guys know that the photos that we take don't always turn out the way that we remember them feeling. So what we teach in the book and in our courses is how to recreate the emotion that you felt, create the emotion that you want your viewers to feel. So everyone needs to go through learning how to see like a photographer, shoot like a photographer, edit like a photographer. And then the 4th step is develop, which is what we've talked about a lot today. It's about becoming the photographer. Once you've taken care of those 3 foundational steps, how do you become the photographer that you actually want to be? And what happens if you start in a direction and then you realize you want to pivot? That's okay. You're not sentenced to a life of wedding photography if you start there. You're not sentenced to a life of, dog portraits if you start there. You can pivot towards a more mature version of yourself. And that's okay. So step 4 is to develop, into your photography, develop your photography niche or your specialty. And step 5 that we write about in the book, which I say is optional because, half of my students don't want to turn pro, but half of them do. So that's what I'm saying. It's optional. Step 5 is to earn. And that's where in the book, we break down how to actually start a business legitimately. And how to book your first gigs. And then most importantly, how to get referred from those gigs and start getting referrals and repeat business, because that's what it's all about. If you book someone one time, you do some photos and they hate the photos and they don't tell anyone about how awesome you are, then your business dies. So what if you get one gig? What you want, if you want to be pro, is to get like a steady pipeline of new people coming in, singing your praises and referring their friends to you. And that's what we write about, those 5 steps: see, shoot, edit, develop into the photography path of your choice, and then earn. That's what we teach in this book. And I'd be honored if you guys would buy this book. It comes out a week from today. It hits bookshelves and Barnes and Noble and Amazon is online, but Books A Million, everywhere books are sold, it comes out in a week from today. And I couldn't be more proud of this book. I poured my heart into it. And yeah, man, I'm really excited.
Awesome. Well, we're excited for you. For everyone who's watching, listening, we did drop the link, learningtosebook.com. Doesn't get any easier than that. And you could just Google David Molnar. That's when you've made it, when you just say, just Google me. You don't need to drop websites. Just Google me and you'll find everything there. Just Google me. Google the book and definitely check that out. And I think that analogy, that flight path pivot analogy, is going to be stuck in my head 10 years from now. I'm going to be interviewing somebody else and I'll be like, I remember when I was talking to David Molnar and he gave me this analogy, and it's so true. So David, I want to thank you for all your wisdom, your experience that you've imparted on us and our entire viewer base here at the B&H event space. And thank you for coming on. Thank you to the team at HarperCollins for helping get this whole thing set up. Your wonderful co-host and cover art photographer, Rich, message me, Rich. I want to know how many takes that took for that cover shoot right there. I want to know if it was hundreds or.
Oh yeah, it was brutal. No, he's a great photographer. I was like, I don't like that one, anyways. But yeah.
But David, want to thank you again, man. So great having you on. We'll have to get you guys back and chop it up some more. But any final parting words?
Oh man, yeah. I believe that anyone can pursue their dreams as a photographer. All you have to do is start with learning how to see, and that starts with learning how to see yourself like a photographer. So I want to encourage you guys to pursue your dreams and do things that scare you. Okay. Do things that you don't believe you can do, because when you do accomplish those things, when you push through that fear, it will build a confidence inside of you and help you pursue even greater things moving forward.
There you go. I'm not going to step on those final words. That was perfect. Huge thank you to David, as I said, the team at HarperCollins, for helping set this up. For all of our viewers out there, go check the book out. Please do buy it and learn how to see yourselves. That is
Well,
it, though. That's all we got. Another round of the B-Nights virtual event spaces in the books.
thank you guys so much for having me.
Catch you
Y'all
on next
rock.
time.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, David.